Things are moving very slowly, but little by little, it seems that some things are starting to happen in Venezuela. Many of you will have already heard that President Donald Trump has just authorized the CIA to carry out covert actions within Venezuelan territory. In other words, he's no longer talking about operations at sea, but on land. But better yet, hear him tell you himself.
I authorized for two reasons, really. Number one, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America. Well, they came in through the border. They've allowed thousands and thousands of prisoners, mental institution, people from mental institutions, insane asylums, emptied out into the United States. We're bringing them back. The other thing are drugs. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. And a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea, so you get to see that. But we're going to stop them by land also.
This is the first time since the United States began concentrating naval and air forces in the Caribbean that Washington has acknowledged wanting to carry out operations on land. Many see this as the beginning of a much more ambitious phase, and that's not surprising, because beyond whatever plans the White House might have for the Chavista guerrillas, the naval operation has been, how should I put it, fairly underwhelming. We're talking about the deployment capable of making the navies of many countries tremble. 8 surface warships, a nuclear submarine, lots of troops, and air reinforcements in the area. But so far, all of that has only been used for missile strikes against alleged drug smuggling boats leaving the coasts of Venezuela, and now also Colombia. But of course, the problem is that this all started almost 2 months ago, and much more was expected. Because, to be honest, so far the only thing this whole operation has done is make the Chavista bigwigs nervous. So far that's been the only real purpose of this massive deployment.
3 U.S. Air Force B-52 bombers flew off the coast of Venezuela for more than 4 hours.
To give you an idea, this on Wednesday, 15th of October. B-52 bombers took off from Louisiana before dawn and flew less than 100 kilometers from the Venezuelan coast for hours. And take note because these are one of Washington's most strategic weapons. They have nuclear capability and huge holds that can carry a lot of bombs, which can be used to carry out all kinds of saturation bombing. It's an aircraft that is used, for instance, in hotspots such as the Korean Peninsula to demonstrate strength to the enemy. And most importantly, they aren't usually used lightly. So why fly these planes off the coast of Venezuela? Well, as I said, to send a message to Chavismo that things are not over and that the pressure is not easing. Quite the contrary.
An armed attack by the United States against Venezuela could occur very soon. The continued military mobilization, the escalation of hostile and provocative actions, and the increasingly incendiary rhetoric confirm this.
But even if it's not as spectacular as some big beautiful B-52s, authorizing the CIA to carry out operations inside Venezuela is much more important. And the question is, what kind of operations are we talking about? What could they do there? Well, obviously, we don't know. Trump, logically, has not revealed the type of operations they have in mind, and everything is shrouded in tremendous ambiguity, which is exactly what Washington is looking for. But when asked by a journalist in the Oval Office whether Trump has also authorized the CIA to overthrow Maduro, this was his response.
CIA have authority to take out Maduro?
Oh, I don't want to answer a question like that. That's a ridiculous question for me to be given. Not really a ridiculous question, but wouldn't it be a ridiculous question for me to answer? But I think Venezuela's feeling heat, but I think a lot of other countries are feeling heat too.
Trump neither confirms nor denies that his plans include removing Maduro from power. At this point, anything can happen. But honestly, for now, our opinion hasn't changed. We're not there yet. VisualPolitik community, in this video, we're going to take a look at what is happening. We're going to see good news, and also, I'm sorry to say, the bad news. The next thing we're going to look at is the situation in what many consider to be the new front of conflict in Venezuela. Pay attention.
The last bet.
In public, Maduro continues to repeat the Chavista mantra of sovereignty and the Bolivarian revolution. But in private, his emissaries are offering something that would make Hugo Chavez himself turn in his grave: handing over Venezuela's oil and gold to American companies. Yes, you heard correctly.
Venezuela's Maduro offered the U.S. his nation's riches to avoid conflict. Venezuela's autocrat had proposed allocating his country's oil wealth and other natural resources to the U.S. and ending deals with American adversaries to appease President Trump.
Officially, Caracas has responded defiantly and firmly to Trump's military escalation. Maduro promises that he will defend the socialist revolution and never allow a new colonization of Venezuelan oil. But behind the scenes, the story is completely different. While publicly issuing threats, the regime continues to accept deportation flights from the United States and send negotiators directly to the White House. And what are they offering? Basically, all kinds of concessions. For instance, full access to oil and gold projects, preferential contracts, diverting oil that currently goes to China to US refineries, and even breaking agreements with companies in China, Iran, and Russia. Or translated another way, if you let me stay in power, the country is yours. So, how has Washington responded to this? With a mix of ambiguity and restrained smiles. Some officials deny everything, while others admit that there have been months of talks with a very specific agenda: oil, gold, sanctions, and political guarantees. In fact, there are signs that there is indeed constant contact between the White House and Miraflores. For example, British oil company Shell has just received authorization from the US Treasury Department to resume its operations in Venezuela. This means that Shell could start extracting gas from the huge Venezuelan Dragon field as early as 2026, processing it and selling it from neighbouring Trinidad and Tobago. And take note, because the opposition has also entered the fray. The recently awarded Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, has seized the moment to present her own economic plan in New York. Her promise is that if there is a democratic transition, Venezuela could generate $1.7 trillion in 15 years. And that, of course, Americans will be the biggest beneficiaries of that business. It's a clear message to Washington: wait a little longer and help us topple Maduro, because if he falls, the spoils will be even greater.
Our message to the oil companies is, we definitely want you here. We want you here, not producing even a crumb of 200,000 barrels a day. We want you here, producing millions of barrels a day.
So while Maria Corina promises oil, gold, and freedom, Maduro offers oil, gold, and dictatorship. Be that as it may, Washington is not being seduced so easily, at least not by Chavismo. As far as we know, the Trump administration has rejected Maduro's offer and cut off diplomatic channels just a few days ago. So the question is, why? What more does Washington want? Well, the answer is simple. To begin with, the problem is that even if Trump wanted to accept the agreement, the contracts offered by Maduro are not worth the paper they are signed on. Without legal certainty, stability, and the rule of law, any investment in Venezuela is a real game of Russian roulette. Today it might turn out well, but you don't know what will happen in a few years. And of course, the point is that with Maduro in power, these conditions are simply impossible. The good news: it's entirely reasonable to think that the regime's downfall is written in bold letters on the White House's roadmap. This is precisely what Sari Levy, Machado's economic advisor, is saying.
What Maduro offers investors is not stability. It's control maintained through terror. The Trump administration has shown a clear intention to not fall for these offers of easy solutions.
Yet another key point of disagreement is strategic. Washington also demands that Caracas break ties with China, Russia, and Iran. At first, Maduro hesitated over this idea. After all, if he wanted to avoid military intervention, he had to give up at least some of that ground. But breaking with Beijing means more than just diplomacy. It means losing its only reasonably stable source of financing. Be that as it may, the pressure is already taking its toll. In order to appease the White House, Caracas is drastically reducing oil exports to Cuba. This has only worsened the situation on the island to the point where blackouts are becoming more frequent. The latest one occurred just a few days ago. VisualPolitik community, Maduro is offering up the country's resources, ceding power to multinationals, and sacrificing his historical allies. But despite this, he still hasn't achieved the only thing that really matters to him: a clear guarantee for his political survival. And therein lies the big, crucial question: what might Trump's plans for Maduro be? Well, that's what we're going to look at right now.
Learning from the past.
Okay, we've seen that Trump has rejected Maduro's offers, but let's go back to the main question. What exactly are his plans? Well, we know that Trump's team has considered several options. One of them is to simply maintain economic and diplomatic pressure, hoping that the fruit will fall when it is ripe. Another is to launch selective attacks against targets linked to drug trafficking within Venezuela, but without ordering, at least for now, a direct attack against Maduro. These appear to be the main scenarios that are still on the table. However, under anonymity, some members of the White House team are hinting at an operation aimed directly at decapitating the regime. Even so, there is a problem. Pay attention to this because it's absolutely crucial. Let's take the clearest precedent as an example: the fall of Noriega in Panama in 1989. A very similar situation, where the dictator did not fall until 20,000 US soldiers invaded the country and took him away in handcuffs. And that was in a country much smaller than Venezuela. And of course, that's not going to happen now. Washington isn't going to deploy tens of thousands of men to overthrow the regime by force. Venezuela is a much larger and better prepared country than Panama. Maduro has survived thanks to the ironclad support of his security forces, despite losing elections time and time again. And that's why many of Trump's advisors are telling him, let's go after the narcos, deliver some strong blows against the regime. Even try, if you want, to take out Maduro or some top henchmen with an attack similar to the one Ronald Reagan carried out on Tripoli, Libya, which nearly finished Gaddafi, but only up to that point. And it shouldn't even look like your real intention is to kill Maduro, because if you fail, it'll make you look terrible. And let's face it, this is the biggest handicap. You can launch a couple of missiles, and they may or may not work. But what the United States will not do under any circumstances is send troops into the country, and that greatly reduces the chances of success of any operation. Conclusion, most likely, it will continue with this strategy of surgical pressure and wait for something to happen. In other words, we're talking about possible targeted bombings against drug traffickers, or even against some government facilities in Venezuela, more sanctions, and an increasingly strong narrative that could justify a possible escalation if necessary. You know what we're talking about. Maduro is not a president, but an international criminal. Something that for Washington, and this is key, could have another advantage. It would allow Trump to avoid the Pottery Barn syndrome. And you might be thinking, what the hell is that? Well, it's basically like that famous quote from Colin Powell during the Iraq War: if you break it, you own it. In other words, if you overthrow a regime by force, you have to rebuild the country, and that, as we all know, costs money, soldiers, and a lot of headaches. But if instead you go the anti-drug route and don't officially talk about regime change, you can weaken the enemy without having to stay and clean up the mess. You wash your hands of it and see what happens. And yes, there are also advisors within the circle who say we mustn't relax because this is a historic opportunity to send the Bolivarians, the Castroists, and the Sandinistas packing to score a spectacular goal and make history. But the problem is the one we just outlined. Be that as it may, for now, if one thing is clear, it's that Trump has no intention of backing down. Quite the contrary. VisualPolitik community, what is at stake is no longer just Venezuela, but something much bigger. It's a game in which Washington seeks to regain control of the neighborhood, but doesn't want to get its hands too dirty. That is where the main stumbling block lies, and it explains why, despite everything, we're not seeing any further developments or more decisive actions. Of course, seeing the CIA carry out operations in Venezuela, that could be a serious blow to the Chavistas. In short, Trump has not yet made a decision about what exactly to do in Venezuela, but that doesn't mean there are no developments. There are obstacles, but also a historic opportunity. An opportunity to score a major political goal, achieve a tremendous legacy, and at the same time the possibility of doing a great deal of business. As you've seen, Corina Machado's opposition is raising the economic stakes. Maduro has also tried, but so far he's failed. And that, well, that's good news. But at this point, the questions are over to you. Do you think Maduro is thinking of giving up? What do you think the CIA will do in Venezuela? Do you think Trump's pressure strategy is enough to make Chavismo collapse? Well, leave your opinions below in the comments and let's get the debate rolling. And very importantly, if you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. As always, thank you very much for being there. Best regards. I'll see you next time. All the best. See you next time.